Join me as I restock my kitchen with all things sourdough, or at least the things I had the energy and time for while pregnant and chasing a toddler. Spoiler alert, I may have set my oven on fire in the process. Don't worry, no carbs were harmed in the making of this video. I started by mixing up my bread dough. I made a double batch because we usually crush at least half a loaf just while it's fresh. After the initial mix on my bread dough, I mixed up my puff pastry dough. This one is pretty easy on day one. You just mix up a few simple ingredients: flour, sugar, starter, milk, salt, vanilla, and an egg. And then knead it, let it rise a few hours, and throw it in the fridge to cold proof overnight. Day two is where you realize why nobody makes puff pastry from scratch, but alas, here I am. When the pastry dough was mixed, I returned to my bread dough for stretch and folds every 30 minutes for 2 hours. Not pictured as the never-ending breakfast and snack train my toddler was requesting between stretch and folds.
Monday.
Once those stretch and folds were done, I let the bread rise on the counter for about 9 hours while I plugged away at everything else. Next up was sourdough discard tortillas. My daughter is currently obsessed with wraps. She wants everything to be a taco, but who can blame her? I had the brilliant idea to make a quadruple batch of tortilla dough this time because, according to my own logic, tortilla dough is so easy. You just mix 5 ingredients: water, discard oil, flour, and salt, and then let it rest until you're ready to roll it out. Easy peasy. For some reason, I wasn't considering who was going to have to roll out 48 tortillas and cook each one individually, but the regret didn't hit till later, so it was fine in the moment. Once the dough was mixed, I threw it in the fridge to ferment overnight. This step is optional with pretty much all discard recipes, but it definitely helps me rationalize my carb addiction and time management issues. After I put that dough in the fridge, I dug out the sourdough bread ends out of my freezer and threw them in the oven to toast for breadcrumbs. I always save stale pieces, bread ends, and fail loaves in the freezer until I have enough to fill a tray to do breadcrumbs or croutons. While those were in the oven, I got started on my sourdough discard cheddar cracker dough. These are genuinely easy and have quickly become my toddler's favorite snack, so next time this might be the quadruple batch. How do you say no to a tiny version of yourself asking for crappers, please, mommy? These are just butter, discard, flour, salt, and shredded cheese. The cheese is optional, but definitely recommended. Everything gets mixed until it's well incorporated. No need to knead it, just form it into a rectangle, divide it into 2 squares, and wrap up both of them until you're ready to roll them out and bake. Again, I let these ferment in the fridge overnight, but they can be made right away. Once I got those in the fridge and the dish is almost caught up, my bread ends were done in the oven. I let those cool before blending them in a blender and storing them in an airtight jar. Sometime between breadcrumbs and bread shaping, I managed to make the most delicious brie, apple, and spinach stuffed chicken breast for dinner and didn't get a single pic to prove it. I shaped my 2 loaves of bread dough and then threw them in the fridge to cold proof overnight. The next morning, I turned on my oven and got back to work. While the Dutch oven was preheating for the bread, I got started on the butter packet for the puff pastry dough. I rolled it out and then threw it in the fridge while I scored my first loaf and got it in the oven. While that loaf was baking, I started phase 1 of rolling out my pastry dough. I honestly screwed up multiple times in this process. Pastries aren't for the faint of heart. I've made these multiple times and I still get something wrong every time. After loaf number 1 came out, I just threw my Dutch oven back in the oven to heat back up while I scored loaf number 2. When the bread came out and both loaves were cooling, the oven was finally free for crackers. Crappers, if you will. I rolled that dough out, docked it with a fork, cut it to the size I wanted, and threw those in the oven. In case you're wondering why I split the cracker dough in 2, this is why. Watch how well these fit on 2 trays perfectly. Chef's kiss. The crackers went in, and so began the daunting process of rolling out 48 tortillas. Each batch makes 8 large tortillas or 16 small taco-sized tortillas, and like I said, I made a quadruple batch, so I divided it in 4 and turned the first half into 16 large tortillas for wraps, and then divided the second half into 32 taco-sized tortillas. While I was prepping and shaping my tortilla dough, the crappers came out of the oven and bought me a little more time from my toddler. These tortillas were quite the process to do with 2 hands and a pan that only fits 1 tortilla at a time. So worth it though to have these soft tortillas stocked up in the freezer for easy, quick meals. When those were done and cooling, I pulled my puff pastry dough from the fridge again for the final phase. I rolled it out and then cut them to the size I wanted. I did them in a muffin tin this time, which left me with deep regret later, but more on that shortly. I used up the rest of our apple harvest and honestly last year's blackberry harvest and made 12 pastries, 6 blackberry pie and 6 brie cheese with apple. Those had to proof on the counter for another hour, so I started slicing the bread and obviously had to break for lunch. How could I resist a grilled cheese with fresh sourdough? After lunch, my pastries were ready for the oven, so I egg washed them and threw them in. While those were baking, I prepped my tortillas for the freezer by separating them with parchment paper. This makes it easy to just pull out one at a time as needed. I also got my bread all sliced for the freezer. Next, I started my brown butter carrot muffin batter. I just reformulated this recipe with maple sugar and sourdough discard, so I was really excited to try it. Other than the process of grating the carrots and browning the butter, this batter is pretty quick to whip up. It's just flour, cinnamon, baking powder, baking soda, and salt in one bowl, and then eggs, milk, sugar, sourdough discard, brown butter, vanilla extract, and carrots in another bowl. Combine the 2 bowls and it's ready for baking. I ended up letting this batter ferment in the fridge overnight. I wasn't originally going to, I was just going to bake it right away, but this is where you'll notice that I'm suddenly baking in someone else's kitchen. Mid-baking, I had to take my pastries to a friend's place to finish baking because I caught my oven on fire and almost burned my house down. They turned out okay regardless, you could barely taste the smoke. It's not my only regret, but I do regret not filming the flames briefly. I had to prioritize getting my child out of the smoke-filled house. At this point, we didn't know if the oven was just a mess or completely destroyed. Good news, the oven and the pastries all survived the butter apocalypse. Remember how I said something always goes wrong when I make puff pastries? Well, this was definitely the worst. My butter leaked, and because they were so snugly in that muffin tin, it had nowhere to go but straight into the bottom of my oven. And silly me, I didn't put any kind of catch tray. I was rushing the process because we had to get to baby ballet. What a life. I actually did this the next day when the trauma wore off, so I did my muffins at the same time. The muffins were a success and unanimously toddler approved by all 3 toddlers that now surrounded me. This recipe is definitely a keeper. And that's it. A full sourdough kitchen restock, 1 fire, 48 tortillas, and approximately 3 mental breakdowns later. You want to try too? Yeah.